Welcome back, Rico. Welcome back to
Hey,
the
good
breach,
to be
almost, I
back.
say. Yes, second time. You're one of the few that's actually made it back for a second time. So I don't know if you
I
count yourself as deeply unlucky or.
I feel very honoured.
So, and just
Unlucky.
for reference, one point I didn't mention last time with Rico. I actually knew him for must have been about a year before he told me I was mispronouncing every single time his surname. And for the first year or so, I was calling you Rico Garofalo. I remember those days well. And then I learned the rhythm of the surname. You never told me,
Yeah.
you little bugger.
No, I can't remember
Garofalo.
why I did tell you in the end, but yeah, Garofalo. It's
I think
but there's
I
so
just-
many syllables in there, it really doesn't. But I think I told you because I knew as our friendship grew, I realised how much of a stickler you were for pronunciation of other people's names. So I
Yes.
thought, I think I better actually tell you that in that case.
Exactly that. It was annoying me, yes, because it's one of those things. Getting somebody's name right is a basic. You can, and certainly when you're interviewing people, I always think if they're going to take the time. Not that this is really an interview, but you know what I mean. When you
Yeah,
approach somebody,
yeah.
the least you can do is actually pronounce their name correctly. It's
Yeah,
one of those basics.
I know what you mean, David. Yeah.
I see. It's going to be one of those. So. When you were on last time, we were talking about the recording studio and recording setup, and we were sort of talking the PC world versus the Mac world and how it all works there. This time round, I thought what we would do, and maybe of interest, is to actually talk about the mechanics of a musician's life post-recording. So it's all well and good having this beautiful project that you've slaved 4 or 5 years over, had some of the best musicians in the land and internationally come and record with you. You've got this album, it's been mastered. What's next? I mean, you've invested a lot of time, energy, and money to that point to get this album. Okay, it was helped by the fact that you could record it all yourself, but mastering you had
Yeah.
to pay, musicians you had to pay. So when you finally get to that point, first of all, when you do you ever feel that an album is finished?
that's a,
I know
that's
you
a
have
can
to
of
sign
worms,
off at
that
some
one.
point and hand it over, but do you ever feel that it's finished?
I would very much doubt that. Well, finished, yes. Completely content, no. But that's not what this is about today. So I'm not going to go down that channel, as it were. But there's a point where you have to go, right, that's it. That's definitely it. Is you have to literally say, right, okay, because you could always end up wanting a change here or a change there. That's a musician's thing, or a producer's ear, or a whoever. We're always wanting to improve. But part of the whole process is learning to go, right, no, that's good. Yes, it could be better, but like anything, you have a time limit and you have to stick to that. And my time limit was brought in by the fact of the album was never initially meant to be released, publicly released. It was meant to be a personal project, but then Dome Records got involved, and at that point, there had to be certain time limits brought in because it was being released via an established record label. And they were, in fairness to Peter at Dome, he's quite lenient with me, and he did move a few deadlines for me because I wasn't content. But sorry, a very long-winded way to say.
No, it's the answer.
In answer to your question, is it ever finished? Yes, and a little bit of the no, because you always want to improve things. I mean, when I listen back to it now, there's things I change, both in terms of the arrangement of the music, but also in terms of the recording and the production. I would have done a few things differently because, as with musicians, as with producers and engineers, you never stop learning. There's always that case. So,
And you've actually segued very neatly, because I'm going to bring Dome in, and Dome is possibly a very good place to start our conversation. But just before we get there, you kind of answered it. I was going to ask, have you sat back and listened to your album? And I say that not from a point of vanity at all. I know from what creating I do, you look back at things critically and you kind of sit back, and I know musicians always view an album as being a reference point of that moment in time of their life, how they were hearing things, seeing things, feeling things. So have you sat back, and obviously you have from what you just mentioned a moment ago.
yes, I have, but not regularly.
No.
I think I did it probably closer to the time upon its release. I think I might have listened to it, I'd probably say about once or twice a week, or certain tunes from it once or twice a week. The longer time went on, the less and less. Kind of thing, for no particular reason. And now I may get an urge every now and then, but I honestly couldn't tell you when I last listened to any of the album, any of the tunes on it. So, not that I'm avoiding it, I just haven't had the urge to want to listen to it. So
So you mentioned that, as I well know, that Seeds was never intended to be a commercial project at its inception many, many moons ago. How was it that it came about that suddenly it became a commercial entity, that a record label got involved? Because when you told me that originally, that makes it sound very, very corporate-y, businessy. It makes it sound like an actual physical thing has to happen.
It came about via actually one of the vocalists on the album. That was Kenny Stevens, who I won't go through the whole process, but when I got to know him better, and when he did get involved, and he heard the other songs on the album, as well as his that I was working on a version of one of his tunes, he said to me, "I think I think you'd be very good to have this somewhere." And I said, "What do you mean by somewhere?" And he said, "I think you should actually look at releasing this via a record label." And I said, "Oh, Kenny, long gone are the days of record labels." I kind of said to him, "And remember, this is a personal project, etc." And he said, "Well, tell you what, I'm going to contact a particular record label that I feel what I'm hearing would really suit." And I said to him, "Yeah, suit yourself. If you, in that case, if you want to, fair enough. But I'm really not, I'm not planning to go down that route." But he kept badgering me about it. So in the end, it was a case of just to keep him, just to stop him badgering me. I actually said, "Okay, then, right. Tell you what." He got an email and a name for me, and I contacted Dome Records, and I'd forgotten about it actually. And then about a few weeks later, I got an email from Dome saying, "Very sorry, we've only just got round to replying to you, blah, blah, blah." And it's very decent of them to do that. And I'd actually, initially, I was about to put the email in the spam box because I literally had forgotten about it. And then I was reading it and I was thinking, "Oh, hold on, this looks like a reply." And they replied saying, "Sorry, we're going to listen this weekend. We'll get back to you." And I thought, well, it's nice. They've actually made the effort to listen. I'm sure they get lots of material sent to them and blah, blah. And then on the Monday, they had listened to it. And Peter in charge gave me a call and he said, "This is really, different and really nice stuff. However, we're not looking to release anything on Dome this year." And I thought, well, it's really nice of him to let me know that, and but I wasn't. I think years ago, had I chased that route, I'd have been quite upset. But because, as I say, I'd never planned it. Being I was in my, already in my 40s, I wasn't trying to chase
It was never the reason for making the album, was it?
No, exactly. So, but I really did appreciate the fact that they got back in touch, and Peter did. So it was a case like that. But he did say, "Can I keep in touch? I'd like to see how the project's going." And he did keep in touch, indeed, which I found odd. And I thought, I'm just a very busy man. He's got better things to do. And eventually, to cut again a long story short here, the guys was that he didn't plan on releasing anything more that year, but he was planning on releasing things the following year, which would have been 2019. And he said, "And in that case, I would like to offer you, a deal with Dome here." So yeah, that's how it came about. It was literally kind of who in that respect. If Kenny hadn't badgered me, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have gone down that route.
You were never pushing the album out to labels, and you weren't trying to find a commercial output. It was just very much a personal venture at that point. So
yes.
When Dome stepped up and it became apparent after a few meetings that it was going to be a released album, how did that change things in your minds? I think you said earlier on that with reference to finishing it, you knew there was a finite point at which you had to release it. There were release dates and schedules and airplay, and pluggers had done their job for radio play and so on. So did it change anything? Well, twofold. Did it change anything materially, and did it change anything emotionally for you?
Emotionally, it gave me the fact that they were interested in wanting to release this via their label, or Peter's label. It definitely gave, should we say, I don't want to use the word an ego boost because I wasn't looking for that.
But a lift.
Which is something I've always wanted to do, yeah. But it did fill me with a bit of confidence to think, wow, well, if they like it, they could put a lot of material out if they choose to. And I know they over the latter years they've been putting less and less out, but that's because I know that Peter has decided to do that intentionally to limit the amount of new material that they're putting out over the last few years. So the fact that he was interested in this, and on top of that, you know, I remember sitting in this actual very studio that I'm talking to you in now, and he was sat on a sofa next to me, and I was a bit baffled when he did, and I said, you know, I really appreciate what you've just offered me, but I'm a bit miffed as well at the same time here, because I'm not a vocalist. This isn't you know, as an instrumentalist, I'm a saxophonist. This isn't a sax album. You know, this is you know, songs from a certain idiom changed, moved around and done certain ways to give them a new spruce of life, or however you want to term it. So how could you possibly, you know, I'm the producer on this, how could you market that? And he said, leave that with me. And that was emotionally nice, because I thought, well, okay, that's, you know, if he hasn't got a particular thing in mind, he obviously has. Should I say, if I didn't, I'll rephrase that. I didn't have something in mind, and I couldn't think how he would do it for a label. It would be easier for me to do something personally, but he did. He knew what he was doing. So that was from the emotional side. And yes, but emotionally also there was more pressure now, because I knew that more people would get to hear it, and it was like, oh no. And then, you know, every single like nook and cranny of each song in production terms, and also the arrangements and everything, all the recording, I was thinking, oh no, perhaps I should have invested more time or money on doing this part or that part, or etc. etc. That was the emotional side. And the other side was well, then the actual physical side of knowing it's going to be released commercially. Did that change anything in your mindset? It did actually, because not from the emotional side now, but I suddenly thought everything has to be far better than, you know, than perhaps I'd have planned for a self-release, or so not sorry, a self-release, but just for a more personal project. And that's when I suddenly thought, oh, I won't be mastering this myself, because, you know, to save costs, yes, I would. We talked about in the last interview, didn't we? Yeah, because I have done mastering and I do master, but as a dark art, I'll just do that, as they say, the art of mastering. And I thought, you know, objectively, the best result would be to let someone else master your own music. I think there's very few people that are extremely good at, you know, don't get me wrong, because, well, this is another conversation we could have. Due to costs, so many musicians do master their own material. So many artists do now master their own material if they're going down the self-release and publishing routes. So, but I opted not to, because I thought, well, if it's going through Dome, you know, like anything, you want something to be as good as it can be, and that's where Motto Sounds came in. So without necessarily, I mean, it's totally down to you whether we put any figures on this. But when a label comes along to you, I'm, as a layman, and I'm sure many of the listeners would not have been in the position, it sounds, you always go back to sort of, you know, the Prince days and the MJ days, that when you've got a label, suddenly, I'm not talking that level of money, but suddenly there's contracts, there's a financial arrangement between you and the label. Now, given everything that I've heard, and I've been lucky enough to talk to quite a number of musicians over the years, the music industry has very much changed. When you then had a label behind you, did that mean that there was some financial element involved then, that some of your costs would at least be recouped? I mean, clearly all the time, I mean, I think it was 5-6 years that you put into it. And then obviously in the last few years, it was getting the other guys to record with you. So you're never going to recoup your time. But I mean, is that how it works with record labels now? I couldn't tell you. I would have thought that each label, and this is talking independent labels here, and obviously I can only speak from my experience again with Dome, but by agreeing to their contract in
so there was a physical contract that you signed.
Yes,
there was something between you and Dome, right? Yeah,
indeed, and it would have been very silly for me. You know, I didn't instantly say yes when Peter offered it to me. He said, "Have a think about it," and I wanted to think about it. Common thing to do. You wouldn't just sign something there and then, but the benefits definitely outweighed the negatives. And the only negative if one could argue this, would have been obviously splitting any profits. But then the counter to that would easily be that Dome's reach is far better than a Virtual Nobody. So that one negated the other. On top of that, it saved me a lot of admin issues because although I changed each song on the album, and that was the whole point of the album, they weren't straight covers. In legality terms, they are. I've just done something different to somebody else's song. And when you release somebody else's song, you are due to pay certain royalties.
So were they counted, technically, they were counted as covers then?
Yes.
Right. So, for instance, with the Benson track on there, I mean, this is where I want to try and get into the business side, and that's the whole nub behind what I want to chat to you about this time. So who do you... Obviously, now is a release by a label, by Dome. They have to presumably approach somebody. Is it... And I'm assuming on a song, I'm guessing if some of the people that have written the songs have passed away, if there's no estate involved, I don't know, who owns these songs and how hard is it to get permission?
Whoever owns the rights to those songs.
Is it hard to find that out?
No. There's an organisation, there's a body that you can go through to actually find that out. It could well be the individual. In the case of George Benson, he said, well, actually, I think on Give Me the Night, I can't remember if it was him exclusively originally or whether it was Rod Temperton, but I actually think it was Rod Temperton and then he sold the rights for it. Basically, he sold them to I've forgotten who they are, and
one of the big labels.
I should be. I think you can help me out here because a certain member of your family now works for them.
BMG.
That's it. Thank you.
Right.
I think, or BMG Connected.
Right. Yeah.
I think it was Universal. Was it BMG or Universal? Oh, for the life of me now, I can't remember. But I know that he'd sold, Rod Temperton had sold basically the rights
before he passed away. So this isn't the estate, Rod Temperton's estate. Before he passed away.
No, he sold them prior to his death.
Right.
Yes, yeah. I don't know how many, whether it's entire or what, but so therefore anything would have to be done via that particular label. And then what they would do, for example, they would say...
So Dome approaches, will say Universal.
Yeah. Or whoever, as I say, okay, Universal. And I think, again, so I could be wrong here, but what generally happens is that, say, if you're planning to release or to release, say, or have printed 100 CDs, if we're talking mechanical here, there's a general guess of how much, because of the should we say, the original success of that song, that would require, they would turn around and say, we want X, Y, Z. Or they may fit that song into a certain bracket and say, well, again, for each mechanical CD or mechanical sale you make of it, we want this amount. That's prior to the PRS royalties, so radio royalties, etc., like that, which would all go by default to the original rights holder as well. So I wouldn't receive anything from that from radio play, or so very little.
Really? So when your tracks got played on air, the majority of the royalty fees go to the original writer, the copyright holders of the track, not to you as reworking them?
Yes.
Yeah. That doesn't seem to make...
No, there's very little money. Well, there's very little money to be made anyway in recorded music. And then you obviously make it less by doing working on other people's material, as I did. But this was never a money-making project, as we know. I keep reiterating throughout this. So that wasn't, none of this was a concern. But it was a huge headache to avoid having to remember there were 10 songs. So having to approach 10 publishers or 10, companies, etc. That was taken. Dome took over.
Dome did all of that,
which I was very appreciative of. So
and do these companies, again, will cite Universal just because, do they take money up front, or is it just on they'll say, as I think you mentioned a moment ago, well, you would say having 100, 200 CDs pressed, so they know that the maximum amount of sales it's going to have is that amount of units, and they won't take anything until those units are sold? Is it percentage of sales?
I would be guessing here. It's a good question. I'd be guessing that they're paid in advance,
Right.
before.
So independent labels do have to front some money up then.
Yes, yeah, indeed.
Right. So
they
even in
do.
the state the
So-
music industry is in, and a lot of these independents are doing it because it's all they know and it's what they love doing, and they've done it for years, and it's a passion and something they're good at. But nonetheless, from a business point of view, it's actually costing them hard cash.
It is, yeah. So they're out.
So they
there,
have to have faith in you then.
Exactly, which goes back to the, I was quite taken aback and surprised. But that's where you have the sudden imposter syndrome that all musicians or artists have, that you're suddenly thinking, really? Do you really want to, I'm thinking...
Now it puts flesh on the bones now. I totally get it.
Exactly, yeah. You've got the devil and the angel. The angel saying, well, obviously, there's, it can't be that bad because...
they think they can make money out of it.
Yeah. And there's the devil saying, no, they're just being polite to you. They've just not had anything nicer been sent to them recently.
I don't think anybody's polite when it comes to spending money. I think that's the truth there.
yeah, and that's the logical side as well. It's like, again, it's that imposter syndrome. But yes, ultimately they're a business. So
right, so we're sashaying neatly along to the murky side now. So how do you recoup, or how did you make any money from seeds?
Yes.
You did.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm not. And did that come from physical sales? I mean, there was obviously the album launch, the gig. Now, did you have CDs on sale at the gig?
Yes. Yep,
so the physical sales,
on sale.
I've always been told that kind of the pecking order for musicians to try and earn some money is A, buy physicals from them, if possible, from boot camp, if not, and latterly from online, the Amazons and so on. So buying directly from you, I know from certainly the jazz world, when I was in that world, if they could sell 10 CDs at a tenner a night, they've made an extra £100 on their gig fee. That's almost probably doubled their gig fee just in selling their CDs. It's terribly important to them,
especially for working and live jazz musicians. Yes, but that also extends to other. But because there's so much little money to be made, unfortunately, within the jazz circles, then jazz artists very much appreciate those physical sales, as would and as would anyone. I was
going to say, I mean, I know you and I, are close to the jazz world, know the jazz world, but I mean, a musician's life is bloody tough. There's not a lot of money to be made for gigging musicians. I mean, there's the obvious outs where they can make money and have to, teaching, peri work. And then, of course, the old functions, weddings, the whole kit and caboodle. That's, I know, bread and butter. So with an album, and obviously we can cite seeds here, were you aware of what was happening in the background? Because, I mean, for instance, say when it's on Apple Music or and we'll come to Spotify in just a moment, it has to have a whole load of... I mean, suddenly when I had your mastered files back, the slug line, the code number was kind of that long. It was 30 characters long, GUXXY. So presumably there's a lot of cataloguing goes on so that people are all getting their fair amount of money down the line.
Yes. Yeah.
So where does your music have to... Although you weren't making money from royalties because they were somebody else's songs, where was your mainstream of money coming from when a track's played on radio then? Did it make any difference to you?
It does, don't get me wrong. I couldn't tell you the percentages, but I did, and I occasionally get an odd dribble of a few pounds, and I do mean a few pounds.
I can believe that.
Pounds from radio play, or did now, because obviously the album's not being played and the songs aren't being played anymore currently. But I did, from certain stations, obviously the BBCs and the BBC local stations and some of the larger guys, that would tally up. So I would, but because I hadn't written the song, I remember going back to that point, I had a small percentage. So I would have had a larger percentage had they, with said radio play, but it was then minimal.
So then out of that piece of cake, if we're looking at it, say if it gets a play on Jazz FM, for instance, you've got the whole bit of cake there. The vast majority of that will go to the writer or the writer's company. Then some of it will go to Dome and some of it will go to you. Is that kind of the way that it's divvied out?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I had literally, any way that the say an artist would have made money, because I signed a contract with Dome, and Dome said, look, these are the percentage we will take X, Y, and Z from from, you know, any radio plays, any mechanical sales, any streaming sale, etc., etc. So, and I knew that ahead of time, you know, what those, you know, what those were. Warrants that. So,
So if we sort of go into the nefarious area of streaming now, Apple Music and particularly Spotify, I guess, are the two big ones. And to get onto Spotify, I guess feels good. I mean, you know, you look and you think, oh, there's my album. There is that little element of vanity, but of course it's now become a business. It's not a self-release. It's not being done purely for pleasure. Now there is money to recoup. So when you see your album on Spotify and they don't do any links to any sales there at all, it's purely on streaming. I'm right in saying that. You cannot buy through Spotify, can you, at all? I'm sure I'm right in saying that.
I don't think you can anymore. I think initially you could years ago.
Well,
but I
as
don't think you
Spotify
can now.
before it was.
I remember when I
it was
first
Napster,
started.
wasn't it originally?
Yeah.
Napster sort of became Spotify, and
No, I think Napster's separate. I
Was it?
believe. Yeah, I think Napster is still different.
so when we see Seeds sitting there on Spotify, the actual album itself for being there, does that earn you anything?
No.
And then
but
if
you could be asking this to Madonna, for example, and she would answer something different because
So
of the numbers of streams. But, you know, but we're talking, you have to be, sorry,
you
I've
have to be that
interrupted
sort
your
of
question.
level, don't you? I mean, that's the thing, to make any kind of a meaningful arrival on your in checks, you need to be at sort of the Harry Styles, Madonna, Prince kind of level of sales.
Yeah, and even then, you know, it wouldn't be the kind of figures that you would associate with those stars. It would be the kind of money that you would think, well, that's not bad.
Oh, really? Even then, you're not
we're
talking
not
life changing.
No, not at all. For example, just as an example, I had a gig a few weekends ago, and I met a vocalist I'd not worked with before, and I was talking to her, and her partner. She didn't mention his name, but we were having a discussion just generally about music, and she was originally from Germany, and I think her and her partner were considering moving there, back there. For musical reasons, and also the cost of living now in London, as they are London based. But I was asking her about her own music and her partner's music, and she says he's been very successful, but the amount of money he would got back, and she happened to mention that his material, and I don't know over what period, has earned him something like 9 million streams, which to me was a huge amount.
Yeah.
And then I think it was a couple of days after, I just happened to be online, and I just thought, and that sprang to mind, and I thought, let me check what that came to. And if I was right, it was something like...
This is 9 million streams.
This is 9 million streams. And I'll tell you what, but I'm just going to do this in the background, so because my
I mean, I would not be able to have
behind.
I wouldn't. I mean, I know
9 million. That's a big number, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't
And I know that we all hear that streams are point something zero of a penny. They're meaningless. But then you think of 9 million, and suddenly you think, hello, that's sensible.
Yes, you think. So I'm now going to. Sorry, excuse me while I do this. So 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. That's 9 times 0.0. Hold on. That's 0.25. If I've done my sums right, how much do you think that person would have? 9 million streams. Remember, this isn't 9 million streams in a year. This was over, I think. I'm guessing here over. Okay, let's just say if it was a year then. Let's just say if they hit 9 million in 1 year.
You've got to think, surely, in any rational world, you've got to be thinking sort of 10,000 up was where your mind would be. That sounds a hell of a lot of plays.
9 million, yes. Well, actually, it's double that. It's 22,500.
Right. For 9
That's assuming.
million.
That's assuming for 9 million. How many people would get 9 million streams? And that's 22,500. Now, if you take out, remember, that's just as a single figure.
Yeah.
That's not profit. That's just how
so
much
that
you
would
would
it
earn from
going to the label, correct? From an artist on Spotify being played.
Yeah, I obviously don't know this artist's particular deal or contract.
It
or
almost stands to
anything about
reason that
it.
you're not going to be self-released and getting 9 million streams. It's going to be pretty commercial.
You would have thought, but then again, let's say even if that were the case, that it was a self-release, but the costs involved anyway, I would, blimey, if you took, let's just be what's the word? Not
Devil's advocate.
Let's just be, yeah. Okay, you could take that. Yeah, we could take that view. Even if we said if the album cost, I don't know, 3 or 4, I'm saying albums, it could be singles, but let's just say $1,000, but say an EP or something, or if it's an album, 10. Let's just say £5,000. Yeah. If that was so, take 5,000 out immediately, and we're on to 17,500. Then there's other costs involved as well. Remember, that's from streaming. I'm sure there would have been many other costs involved. It's not just by streaming, so it would have been CDs, manufacturing, and what have you, promotion, gigs, paying musicians, etc. So suddenly it comes to me, could you live on that for a year?
That's the thing. When you suddenly look at that
in London,
you know.
So whilst 22,500, but say if somebody had sold 9 million singles back in the day.
I don't know.
That's very different.
Now, this is if selling singles, say back in the 70s and 80s, would that amount of physical sale of a single have made you wealthier as a musician? Would you be earning more?
Oh God, yes.
So is that,
would be, yeah.
But that's because presumably, and I know I'm not trying to point the wicked finger at Spotify here. It's just they are the major streaming platform and have been very central to the way that people now consume music, and have turned it into this streaming culture. But with a single, then would it not have been the same rules apply that out of, I remember when a single was 99p, I think. So out of that pound, when you bought a single, the majority of that would go to the label, and then it's to the writer, and then to the artists.
Yes, unless the latter two were one in the same, the artist and the writer. But even so, say it out of that 99 pence. Let's just say that I couldn't tell you how much.
But it's actual full pence. It's not fractions of a pence.
No, exactly. Let's say if it was 10 pence, 15 pence. Those figures kind of come back to me from years ago.
Right.
I don't know why they're in my head, but let's just say, for the sake of 10 pence, at 9 million singles,
I can't do it.
That would be 900. Would it? No, sorry, but that would be
90,000.
Yeah, wouldn't it?
Something.
So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 times. Yeah, just by the 10 pence, and you're on to that. Sorry, 90,000. What are we talking about? We're both rubbish. 900,000.
900.
900,000 off 9 million.
So
it's a tenth of.
Where do you think the change came? I know that's quite a big question to ask, but we've both been, well, you much more so than me, but been involved in the music business through this period of change, probably one of the most radical changes that's happened to the recording industry. Yeah. What do you cite as being the reason of that change? Was it the immediacy that people wanted, the fact that people just suddenly could have it for free? What? And they didn't want to own anymore. I know there's a small sea change happening at the moment, but it seemed that there's a long time people weren't that fussed about whether they physically owned an album. As long as they could listen to it, that was good enough.
That's almost a human nature question, I would say, or elements of it would reflect on human nature. I think a lot of people, if they can get something free, they will. We're also living very much in a society where people want to, and this people are now used to, not just wanting it, but they're used to. If they want something, they want it there and then. They don't want to wait. They can get it there and then. And to me, it's almost a bit like the spoilt child at Christmas that has lots of presents. Wonderful, this is great. I've just unwrapped it. Right, next.
Yep.
And they actually haven't had a chance to play with it yet.
Consumed, disposed, and
it's slightly that. Now, obviously, each person is an individual, and I can't paint the brush on everyone with that. And some people insist still now that they would rather have something physical in their hands, be it vinyl or CD or what have you. Other people, I know so many people, and this is presenters and disc jockeys as well, that have just literally, switched their recorded and transferred their whole CD digital collection and vinyl collections in some cases to digital format and sold everything. So everything is literally on a hard drive somewhere. Everybody is different in that respect, but the change, going back to your question, what influenced that big change? Napster originally, when it started, it was just a free-for-all. Everyone could just get what money they liked. Sorry, not money they liked, what music they liked.
Yeah.
In a digital format, and nobody was making money from that. So when the streaming, well, Spotify, I think, who were the first, I might be wrong on that, but when Spotify decided to come along and say, hey, is there a way we can do this, even at a loss initially, should we see if, the whole streaming aspect? Because remember, initially Napster was downloading, it wasn't streaming. It was you're downloading a product to be able to listen to in your own time via your own equipment, and there was no connection via Wi-Fi or 4G or basically the streaming services that were needed. That changed when with the improvement of the internet, when the speeds increased and connections became more reliable, that suddenly you didn't necessarily have to download something onto your iPod or whatever it was, because you could actually just listen to it streaming from wherever you were. So I think that was a big change within the digital realm, and that happened fairly soon, I think. And the convenience aspect of it, because don't get me wrong, I think streaming it's a wonderful concept, don't get me wrong. I just feel for everyone involved, from the musicians and the artist point of view, and everyone involved in producing and making music that aren't financially compensated to the degree they should be, in my opinion, and I'm sure in the opinion of many others.
Did you ever question or say to Dome, morally, I just don't want it on Spotify?
No. The reason I paused then is because initially, had I've gone my own route, I would have refrained from putting it on there initially. And I know some artists do that. They hold it back from streaming sites, their music, and then after X amount of time, they'll decide to put it on. But no, I didn't. And Peter spoke to me about the stream, because we're going back to 2019, and it's strange to think actually that was 3 years ago. But with COVID, obviously, everyone forgets that 2-year gap of COVID. So when he did tell, he said things are changing considerably, and even 3 years ago, there's been a big change in the streaming, how it increased and gotten more. And Dome were very aware of that, how their own music and their library and catalogues were being were being consumed, and they like anyone else had to adjust as a business. Myself as an individual and my own moral opinions of streaming and have you, I decided to not kick up a fuss or anything like that with Dome, because I saw what's X% of nothing.
Right. Yeah.
I say that, and someone can say, well, it's not nothing. It's 0.002 pence.
Yeah.
But realistically,
and for the tens or hundreds of thousands of streams you've had, obviously the remuneration is pitifully small.
It is. So, but someone could say, well, your music should be better, or it should be, But again, going back to that point, it was tough for me in some ways, because, and I don't mean wrong phrase to use, or wrong. I don't mean tough as in oh no, I didn't make much money from it, because again, I'll reiterate, the project was never about making money. So so in that respect, it wasn't a concern. Yeah, I just thought no, I'm going to go along with this. Because it was, back in 2019, and we're going back how many years now? Streaming was already firmly, had its roots down, where everybody was now switching to the big streaming services, and a lot. I mean, there are arguments within the musicians' circles, and some people have said it just is the way it is. You have to adapt, and there is that. so many people have to, we all have to make a decision and adapt, as it were. But the negatives, in my opinion at least, are far more than the positives. Yes, it's handy. As a consumer, for me, it's wonderful. Don't get me wrong. I like using the streaming services because they're very quick, they're fast and efficient, and they're a great way of sourcing certain music.
However, I know you kind of go about it in the right way, because if you find an artist you like, you'll then go and buy their album. Yes, you'll use it almost as a reference. I know you've from years gone on. You'll find some trumpeter from Norway that you're absolutely in love with his tone and play, and suddenly you'll go and find his back catalogue and have albums imported. I know what you do.
Yeah, and I'm one of very few. Speaking to a mirror here, because I know you do the same thing. But there are very few of us, and exactly. Yes, that's a fraction of your vinyl. I couldn't, where that's a personal decision. That's something I want to do. I'd like to have the physical thing, but also, especially with new artists, I like to think I'm supporting them, because obviously having the experience, it brings me back to that post album release period, which I did find. I'm sure you know this because I talked to you. I did find that tricky. I think Kenny referred to it as the post release blues, or the post album blues, which definitely hit, and I found it difficult to listen to new music initially after that period of the album release. Nothing to do with the music itself, because there's so much wonderful music being made, and I really wanted to listen to it. But it was like a slap in the face, of reminder. I could picture all these wonderful artists, vocalists, musicians, in studios all over the world, recording, putting so much effort into it, at huge personal and physical and financial costs, only because we now just want it like that, and we listen to it once and we're gone on. For people just to go, oh yeah, I like that. Oh, I might listen to it twice. I might listen to it 3 times. Half a track. No, that's it, gone. And the amount of effort that has gone in to produce that one track from either an artist or a band is huge. But I'm sure there are other industries that suffer this as well, and individuals and artists within those.
Oh, hell, I was guilty as charged. I mean, there was a former life where I played music on the radio, and I was lucky. I got sent many, many tracks every week. And the amount, it had to grab my attention within the first, brutally, I'm probably within as little as 25, 30 seconds, unless it really had something sparkling there. And certainly if I saw anything that looked Brick Wall Limited, and it was just like an absolute brick of a waveform. I just knew I knew without listening how that was going to sound.
Yeah. Isn't it funny that that's,
visually, I mean, you look at music visually, which is kind of ridiculous. So
again, that's another avenue of conversation, isn't it? The fact that we can do that. We're now talking about
the loudness wars. Maybe that should be round 3, because we could probably dig deep into
blimey, yes,
Michael Jackson and Thriller, and the various iterations of that over the years, of getting louder and louder and louder
and louder and louder.
Funny enough, today I listened to Quincy Jones, the Dude album, just because I just pulled it out of nowhere. And still, that's a master of a recording, isn't it? Every track is just, Anyway, digressing. So I was speaking to a musician a few years back who actually took the counter position on Spotify and on streaming. He said, well, look, I was lucky. I got onto a big playlist. People that didn't know me found me on there, and then started, to stream me. And if I was lucky, would then visit my website, buy a physical. And if I was really lucky, come to a gig and support me as well. So I guess there is a little bit of good. That's lucky, but this getting onto a playlist thing, I didn't realise until that point how important that could be.
Very, very much so. But I use, and it's something that's been discussed by many musicians, and a lot of people obviously know that these playlists are the way to try and get something back from the streaming industry. My own analogy with it is, however, how do I term this? I often view these playlists as the lifeboats on the Titanic.
Explain.
Let's all try and get on one of these lifeboats. Those lifeboats are the playlists. Right. And I hope I haven't offended anyone by trying to compare music within, a tragic accident.
I think it was long enough ago. And I've heard music that's been a very big tragic accident, don't you worry? It's probably a very fair analogy.
But my point being that everybody's scrambling to try and get onto these playlists. And there's only so many of those playlists that you can get onto. And don't get me wrong, it is wonderful, the fact that some people can make, but as I said to you, referring back to the artist we were talking about a while ago that made 9 million.
So even if you got onto a big playlist, because I was thinking if you suddenly got onto a playlist that I don't have Michael Bublé or Harry Connick on there, big household names, that's going to make a big difference for you, but probably not 9 million streams.
No. I mean, that's 9 million. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you what Bruno Mars's are, but if we went off YouTube, in theory, the guy should be a multi-millionaire. Because he has billions. And I mean, he has billions on one track alone. I don't remember what it's called.
Because obviously, as you know, my toes are sort of a little bit dipped into YouTube. So obviously, artists do get rewarded properly when they got their own channels on YouTube. YouTube are very hot at actually making sure they get correctly and fair. Well, not only remunerated, also know they're very, very hot on copyright strikes. If you play any music, a couple of bars, well, not even as much as a couple of bars.
Oh yeah, they are.
You'll be taken down. That video will be off double quick.
That is, but they also pay less than the streaming sites.
Oh, do they?
Which is already...
Really?
Yes.
I thought YouTube would pay more.
No, they pay even less because more people listen to get their music from YouTube.
Economies of scale.
They would.
They figure more.
Also,
was Seeds put up as an album on YouTube?
It is on there, but that was handled by Dome.
So it is as an album? Because I've listened to the physical. I've never looked
I don't think it's up as one file as an album. I think it's individual songs, but as an album link, as it were.
I hadn't even thought about the revenue coming from YouTube. That's a whole new one. I didn't think of that as a music streaming platform, which is ridiculous because I know it's huge.
It is huge. And remember, it's also a certain demographic. Younger people will go for YouTube. Very much so. Similar to the TikTok thing, the visual episodes. But equally, they pay even less than the streaming sites. So there's no win. So going back to that artist, yes, that's the playlists are good. And I'm fortunate enough via Dome's connections. So I think it was it should have been you that got onto one of the Deezer playlists. And it stayed on there for a very long time, which is wonderful news. But that was via Peter and Dome Records. Had he not have had that link, would I have got onto that playlist? But then there's also picking up on your point that would have introduced to the artist you interviewed, that would have introduced other people to his music or to his other. I think you said him to his other music, which is obviously great. Which would have meant more streaming for that. And then there's the side of, he said, for people to come and see him or his band perform live, which is one of these arguments that a lot of people put forward. Well, the money now is to be made live. Well, not all music was recorded to be performed continually live.
Because if you had to take Seeds around as a live tour, that was a big set. There was loads of musicians there, wasn't there?
Of course, yeah. I mean, it was just too impractical. Even in, I think, in pre-streaming, days, it would have been quite tricky. But yeah, there's something that a lot of people who use that argument, I feel, overlook, that not all music is written with the intention of it being performed regularly.
As a live.
So yeah. So some of it is, some of it isn't. So we all have to adjust and do what we have to do.
And I did hear some sort of rumours that the figures that are set behind streaming revenue is all... Now, this might just be one of those urban myths, but it's set by the major 3 or 4 labels, saying, look, if you want our catalogue on there, this is all you're going to get from us. Otherwise, you don't get to play Bruno Mars, you don't get to play Harry Styles. This is all we're going to pay you. I wonder how true that is.
Yeah, good point.
Because for every major star, like even on those labels, even say on Sony, you're going to have those top few, the George Michaels of the time and so on. But then equally to that label, it's still going to be the people rising to the top that are, aren't going to be getting those kind of hits and streams. So I don't know. You'd imagine industry does always win, and if Sony was, because they come to my mind first for no other reason, but if they were to turn around and say to a streaming platform, Deezer or Spotify, right, that's all you're going to get paid by us if you play our music, take it or leave it. I assume they'd sort of have to bend over and take it, really, because what you're going to do, you can't run a commercial streaming service and not have the music of the moment on there, can you?
No, you can't. But the deals that are done there, I'll be hands up. I know so little of. If anything, what deals are struck between those. I've heard the same thing. There's the big 3 or 4 that sit down with these streaming sites and decide whatever what's happening with these catalogs. I remember was it last year again? This the COVID factor. I always say it screws everyone's memories up for the last few years, but I remember there being a period where a lot of famous artists from now older artists were selling their catalogs to the record companies, selling them out or selling them to streaming sites, should we say. I can't remember which, so that they'll get something there and then as a lump sum, so that they would make some
money.
And they realised then that because nobody was going to now go and buy their CD sales and things.
Was this your first direct look at the music business through contracts? I know you've been a session musician for many years, you've written and so on, but was this your first dealings from actually putting your name on the dotted line?
Yes.
And
yeah,
I know, again, from conversations you and I have had, that there's a possibility somewhere at the back of the Garofalo mind that Seeds 2 may or may not happen, depending on how you feel emotionally. If that were to be the case, if that were ever to become a reality, would you be interested in it becoming a commercial option again? Or have you had enough of what you've seen and think, no, for the ball ache that goes with it, I'll keep this just as a self-release?
No, I would definitely consider it if if a label were interested in doing so. Yes, yeah.
Or maybe phrase that question slightly differently. If you were to think of Seeds 2, would now your business brain be in check first of all, and you'd go looking for a label before making the venture viable? So before beginning to actually spend any of your emotional time sitting, writing, rewriting, reworking, would you go out to a few independents and say, right, look, I've got this concept, this is what I did this first time around, are you on side, do you want to be behind me? And would that then govern your...
No, personally it wouldn't. I would, as it was in the first time, with Seeds, it would be completely about the music.
Right.
And once I'd probably had about half or at least the good the good bones of it, all of the tunes, I then may approach, but a substantial bit of it, all of that's me personally, that's how I would want to do it. But if I'm to do it again, similar to the first time, as I said, it turned out that way. The second time, yes, I would actually would want to release the album, and not as a personal venture, but as a viable product.
And I suppose almost a good point at beginning to think about wrapping the conversation up with you. From what you've seen of it, is music viable?
Define viable, though. That's the
sustainable from a means of revenue for a family man, for somebody just wanting to live. If you want to be release music and have music listened to on the streaming platforms and on Apple Music and so on. If one of your kids actually
as a recording
turned around
artist
to you and said, "Look, Dad, I want to make money out of being a recording artist,"
no. I would definitely say no if my children said that to me. Personally, someone else, you could literally ask the guy down the street, the woman on my left, the person on my right. They may argue yes, but from my experience, no, not unless using just that example of
the 9 million
I've not met, that 9 million streams that only made that person £22,500. Now, that's, don't get me wrong, that's a good wedge of money there, £22,500. But is it enough to then pay your costs out and to try and live on for a year while you've been doing that project in London, where they live, and where that person lives? No, it's not. So if that's with 9 million, that kind of answers your question. But as is often the case, but not always the case, a lot of musicians, especially the people I've worked with, none of us got into music for money, which doesn't mean we're just happy to give everything away free, but equally it's I wouldn't be doing a second album for any financial gain.
No.
But what I would do is try and minimize any loss. That's how I would, I wouldn't be using 36 musicians this time.
I was just going to say, what do you equate as a loss? Because I prefaced it at the beginning of our conversation. You're in a lucky position. Well, it's not lucky. You've made it happen. But you've got your own studio. You are a musician. You can mix. You can master. So you can. Well, if you wanted to master, you could do 100% of the project. And you're multi-instrumentalist, certainly across the horns. So you could make quite a lot of music. Yourself.
I could use.
Then you could samples, and if you wanted to, do away with musicians at all, which I know was why Seed sounded so different, was because it was all musicians. There weren't stems and loops on there. It was actual musicians playing actual instruments. But that's what you mean by minimising losses. You could go around. You could just go to a music library, use some beds, and sort of make it cheap.
No, I just use fewer musicians. No, it depends on the music. Don't get me wrong. Certain styles or certain things I may well want to use rather than bring a drummer in and record a drummer in the studio. I may well want to use, a programmed track. I might program the track myself from various samples or what have you, depending on what the song needed or what I feel it would need. But with Seeds, I did want as much live as possible. That was the whole process. I think that would pretty much stretch to what, number 2 album, if and when I get to it. But, I wouldn't be using something like, I can't remember how many bass players I used, 6 or 7.
How many musicians were involved in that project overall? Must have been upwards of 20.
I think it was 34, 36. Because it was always, as you know, it was meant for me to sit down one day with a CD in my hand, physical product, look through the inlay and go, oh, I remember working with him, I remember working with her, and blah, blah. It was always meant to be a personal thing to look back on in. And it still is. I still will do that in years to come because there are so many people involved. And that's a fraction. There were so many more I wanted to, so many wonderful, talented people that I've worked with that I couldn't get on to that album. And someone said, can we get on to the next one, as it were? But, that was then. So anything now would be, as I said, would be done differently.
And the question I mean, I haven't actually asked you over our recent conversations, is it any more likely? How's it sitting in the ether?
Yeah, it is. It's more likely, but I've, the last, again, I hate using the C word, COVID, but COVID changed a lot of things for a lot of people. It did. That's not what I'm about. COVID didn't change any aspect of my want. It's whilst a lot of musicians took the time to actually get into music and start recording and writing, which they wouldn't have had. Performing musicians had the time now forced upon them. I was the opposite. I had that time forced upon me, but I didn't want to go anywhere near the studio. I just lost all enthusiasm for doing it. I was one of the opposites. Whereas now the world is coming back to normal. I'm now getting the bug again. So it's weird how it pans out, but also I wanted to spend a lot more time with my family, my 2 young boys, because before you know it, as you know, they go grow from that to that, and exactly, and they won't want to know Dad, in a few years to come, I imagine, or want to know him less. So, and I won't get that time back. So my family, has taken priority there. Definitely.
And I've just pulled it onto solo, which I'm sure you can see at your end, and we're now getting the view of your studio in full with a tenor to one side and all the wiring behind you hanging up there, a proper, and that is where Seeds was recorded, right? That is the studio where it all happens.
This is, It's strange because it does look, I'm just looking behind me now as a mess, I've got a T-shirt hanging up on the back of the doors and various cables and everything behind that partition there is done just to keep the mess out of the way of the shelves of mic boxes and various other.
The creative end is down here where you're sitting.
Yeah, and
And I remember sitting on that sofa one bank holiday Friday. I think it was a Easter Friday. I first came over and listened to the album. I think just before it went on public release. I think you said come and have a listen to, and that's where we sat and actually went through all of the tracks, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah, it looks smaller than it is actually. From I'm just seeing this now behind me on the screen.
The camera does kill it. I know,
but this is the place that it all happened. Yes.
Have you got any of your physical CDs left?
I have. Yes. Yeah.
Then where are they? Yeah. Where can people buy a physical of yours?
Physical can still be bought from the specialist music stores within,
such as Soul Brothers and so on, and
etc. Yeah, there's Soul Brother, and I've forgotten the name. Forgive me. I've forgotten it. Is it Essex based? I've forgotten what it's called. Even Amazon, but I wouldn't suggest going to Amazon.
Well, as you know, I know somebody bought one there. The other half bought one there, and there was one left or something. It was really low. That's why I asked, is there any... I didn't... where do those stocks get replenished from then? Is that down to Dome?
They did get replenished from Dome. I don't think...
Just getting back into the business side, further. Dome were responsible for actually getting CDs pressed, cases, inlays printed, the whole thing, distribution, that was all down to them.
Yes.
Right,
Tiny Dome. So.
Right, yeah. Because I assumed, again, that's part of when you sign the contract with them, I guess that's part of what they say they'll do. They'll make the vinyl or the CDs. That's part of the deal that they're going to offer you. Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Well, it's heartening to hear that it's possibly more likely than not that you're going to dip your toes back into...
Oh, from the musical side, yeah, definitely. It will happen. It's just a case of, as I say,
well, it's like priorities. There was never a dead. Now even if it were to be another commercial venture, does not have to be a deadline on it. It's not like you're ever going to have somebody breathing down your neck at this point saying we need it out by 18 months' time. If you decide to start, it will kind of take its own life form from there. And is it the songs that you had left over from Seeds 1 that could be looked at again?
No, because it was literally when I got those 10 songs, it was that. I did have some ideas for a few other, but I'd have to go back now and listen to those and think, is that where I am musically now? I know that sounds a bit like a cliche. Is that where I am?
No, very much so.
But yes, musicians' tastes and interests and their own, a lot of things change. So. And I always wanted to do an album, as you know, which was of those songs that got me into the whole soul jazz funk scene, and do something about them. Whereas, I think people might be surprised. If anything, what's in my head now, would it be more on the jazz side of things? And I don't mean by jazz. Jazz influenced,
I
say,
not necessarily hard bop, and
yeah, exactly, all the realms and all the the styles within jazz, because they are umpteen, if not more. I don't mean in that respect. It still would be a very soulful album, because that's where I am. It's all to do with groove.
But that is the beauty, as we said earlier on, of the kind of music that you make, and artists such as yourself make, is that it is that moment of their soul at that time. Whenever you look back at Seeds now, that was how you were hearing and feeling that. I mean, particularly hearing, I think that's how you were hearing the music when you were mixing, and when you went to the artist and said, I want you to lay this down for me, this is what I want you to give me. That album, you can tell it's you. It's your DNA. It's not an anodyne commercial 4/4 kind of same beat all the way through album. It's it was so personal. So it goes to reason that if you were to ever make Seeds 2, that maybe it would have a slightly different influence, but it would still have that same Rico,
hopefully
sound stamp to it.
Yeah, well, I know he'll be filled in with all of it happening if and when it does, or should I say when it does?
Well, this time around we should actually catalogue it properly, maybe, if that does ever happen. Now that we're sort of in this realm of we should actually make videos down the line of what's going on.
And actually, speaking of that, something I wanted to bring up, but and I'm going to bring it to an end now because I know the. Anyway, I'll be very quick. We were talking of streaming, we were talking of CDs, and the whole. We hadn't discussed the whole physical side of. Yeah, we have gone to streaming and removed the physical concept, but with vinyl sales, increasing and I think they've plateaued a bit, but they have generally been going up and up and up. And people did ask when Seeds was released, is it coming out on vinyl?
It'd been perfect, wouldn't it?
But, the physical restraints of a 10-track, album. It would have been a double album easily, if not. But then you have the issue of trying to fit how many songs onto 22. Now, is it 22 and a half minutes on each side? Pretty much of a vinyl of a,
Yeah,
a
because
vinyl album.
you now you said it. Of course, most of the more commercial, certainly if I think of the Do Twins, I think that was 4 tracks a side, maybe 5 tracks.
Yeah.
On 4 tracks,
And that was a
like wasn't it?
restriction, and that's the restriction of vinyl.
Yeah.
So it's something I'll consider when it comes to.
But then there's a cost involved.
So there's a cost, but then there's also the musical restriction. If I'm thinking, hold on, I need, do I need to shorten the songs? And one of the things I loved about Seeds is that if I wanted a song more than 5 minutes, it was more than 5 minutes. I didn't want to be restricted to the typical kind of 3.5 to 4.5 minute thing. As you know, I'm a huge fan of Isaac Hayes and his musical tapestries that can go on for like 10 minutes.
10, 12 minutes, yeah.
Yeah, so I might just release 2 songs and one on each side. Who knows? We'll track that bit. But yes, that physical side of which we didn't get onto, the vinyl aspect. But yeah, so much we could discuss.
I will let you go, but there was one funny. I remember I was very desperately behind on producing one of the jazz shows one week. And I just went through a library, anything that was over 15 minutes long made it, because I just thought I haven't got time to actually. And I thought there's one thing I can rely on, that jazz is going to go on. So I knew I could definitely find some Miles tracks that were 14 minutes long.
Oh, my word, yes, yeah.
Some
That's
Dexter
the
Gordon
great
was going to
thing.
be in there. And
Jim Hall, a couple of Jim Hall things. Yes, yeah, that would have,
it got me
that
out of
would have
jail
been
that
great.
week handsomely, it really did. I think I only played about 12 tracks for the whole 2 hours.
Wow, that's impressive. That's impressive.
I was thinking on my feet, that was. Rico, thank you. It's been a wonderful insight into the world of music and kind of just what makes it all tick. It's just great to pull the layers back a bit and hear how it really works. Once you finish recording it, what happens next? And, there's a lot of layers that go on behind the music business, and it's just interesting to hear firsthand what really happens. So I'm glad it hasn't put you off, though. I'm glad you're thinking pretty buoyantly that at some point when the stars align, that it could all happen again.
As I would have said to you before, a good friend and a bass player that played on the album, Ollie Collins, said to me years ago, musicianship is a virus. and you never get rid of a virus. It could be dormant, but you've got it for life. It could be dormant, and some days the effects need to be released once a day, once a month, once in a year. But for other people it has to be done even more regularly.
I spoke to you earlier this week and I said I've started listening to music again. And you mentioned with the Seeds blues, you just didn't want to be listening and consuming music for a long time. And it happens, doesn't it? Even for somebody that says, I'm certainly passionate, and your passion goes even greater than mine. And even you had your moment where, no, I just can't. I've got to walk away from it. And for a long time, music just didn't mean anything to me. I don't know why. For 8 months, 9 months, it just left my soul, and it's coming back now. But it's one of those things, it can never be forced.
No, and it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. So I'm glad you listen to yourself in that respect, because when you do come back, you're going to love it more for that reason. That's why I didn't the same. I'm not forcing myself to like anything or to listen to, because it'd have the opposite effect. And I would just rather listen to something and thinking, I like this, rather than the opposite and thinking, this is good. I've got to hear music now. Yeah. So there's a negative connotation with it. So next time I were to hear it, I'd be thinking, that's the tune that, I remember thinking negatively of unfairly, purely because my head was elsewhere.
So I'm going to lay the marker down here. Round 3 will be Loudness Wars then. I think that's a good follow-on.
Okay, actually, that would be an interesting
That would be an interesting one, because we've both got our roots in vinyl, we've both got our roots in music of a few years ago, and suddenly all those classics are becoming louder and louder for no good reason that I can see. But let's not ruin another conversation. We'll have that one as round 3. How about that?
Wonderful.
Works for you?
Indeed. Round 3.
Rico,
till then.
Thank you. Marvellous. Thank you so much for your time. Great as ever. Rico Garofalo, thank you so much.
Wonderful pronunciation. David Lewis, thanking you for having me.
Rico, cheers,
Cheers,
mate.
buddy.
Thank you. Lovely. Thanks.